Welcome back to N.E.R.D.S, the podcast where we needlessly, endlessly rant about dumb shit. And today, Zackary is going to rant about dumb shit. I am your host, Lukas.
I am your host, Zackary.
Yeah, there we go.
For the second time.
What are you talking about today?
This episode, we were talking about isolation within sci-fi.
Oh.
Specifically with movies and video games. Because I haven't really read a lot of sci-fi books. I do want to. New Year's resolution, read more sci-fi books.
Makes sense.
But how are we doing? How are you?
I'm doing much, much better than I have been lately, honestly.
That's good.
I've been working out a lot more. I've been going to the gym every day after work, which has been nice. Been trying to eat healthier. There's New Year's resolutions and all that. Also, body dysmorphia. But yeah, no, I've been feeling more energized, more focused on things, and today was the first day I was like, I don't have to do anything. Yay!
That's good.
Yeah.
I feel similarly, yet so different.
Mm-hmm.
I've been very productive during last time we talked, which was last Monday. During the week, I was very productive, very, get shit done.
Mm-hmm.
And then the weekend hit, and it was very much just, I don't want to do anything. I just kind of want to sit in bed. Well, it also snowed here.
Yes.
We didn't get a lot of snow, but the weather went from... It was 50s on Thursday, because we had the door open for D&D.
We did.
And then the next day, it hit 30s, and then the next day hit -1.
Yeah, -1, yeah.
So it's just been like that, and I think today is, 0 right now?
Yeah, it's fucking cold.
Miserable. But I've not been too bad.
That's good.
Mostly just trying to get back into the productive swing of... I think I've talked about it in one of the previous episodes of, when you've got so much going on each week, not losing the feeling of productivity.
Yeah.
And trying to be okay, well, I have the podcast to work on, I have Dragon Realms, my D&D campaign to work on, let alone, other things I want to do, which is either just hanging out with friends or my boyfriend. But this week was sort of the testament, but I'm going to blame it on the weather.
Nah, that's
because it going from very, 40s, 50s, and then maybe, high 30s to, 0 and, -4 degrees. It's been rough.
I get that. No, I've been taking time to, because one of the things I want to work on for myself is making sure my spaces are a lot more clean. So I've been if I'm not doing anything, I've just been taking time to just, take out some trash or do some laundry or something like that. So I've been fairly productive for some of the things, even though I have to stay inside majority of the time. So
it's exciting. I both hope for more winter weather, but I also hope for no more. Because I love winter. Because it's fun to bundle up and to do things, but it's also it really does suck on motivation.
It does.
I'm trying to think what... It's weird that we've gotten... this is the start of our winter. Mid-January. We didn't get any in December.
No, it felt like another fall kind of summerish day.
Yeah, it was December 25th, and it was 60s. Not snowing. The first day of snow we had was last week.
Yep.
Which is crazy. So
that's global warming.
Yeah.
It is a shitty thing. Hey, y'all, save the planet.
Yeah, but what are you want to move into weekly obsessions?
Oh boy. So I have been in a big Persona kick recently.
I think we talked a little bit about it last week.
Yes.
About your replaying.
I've been replaying Persona 5 Royal specifically, and I've been enjoying that immensely. But a lot of news has been coming out about the new Persona 3 remake.
Oh.
Persona 3 Reloaded. And Persona 3 is my personal favorite in the series.
Okay.
So I am so goddamn hype.
When did the original one get made?
Oh god. So the original Persona got made somewhere in the 1980s.
Okay, so it's an old game.
It's an old game. But Persona 3 specifically was around PS2 era. So...
Which is what, a good decade?
A good decade.
Of just any time?
But early PS2 era.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's a fun fucking time. I'm not going to say much because they're, Persona 3 Reloaded is coming out and there's spoilers that I could say.
It was released in 2006.
That makes sense.
Almost 20 years old.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's rough. That hurts. So, funnily enough, my experience with Persona has been Persona 4 is what got me into Persona. Mm-hmm. Persona 3 is what made me really stay in Persona, and then Persona 5 has just been an continuation of that. And if I was to give my own personal ranking on them, Persona 4 is on the bottom. Not to discredit it, but I do not think that the cast in Persona 4, let alone the dungeons themselves, made for more interesting stuff than the other ones. Mm-hmm. They kind of really didn't give too much personality to a lot of the casts.
That's fair. I didn't know anything about Persona.
And its core theme of... So, Persona 4's core theme, and each Persona has a theme that it kind of goes with. It basically takes the fool's journey and then just adds a theme to it. Mm-hmm. Its core theme was the truth and media. Ooh. In this, in the spread of, like, falsification of media. Ooh. And trying to, you play as an investigating team, basically. But... Yeah, not to discredit it, it's still a lot of fun, and I understand why people like it. It's just not my favorite.
Yeah.
Then there's Persona 5, which is probably my second favorite. So Persona 5, its whole theme is rebellion, and specifically disordered cognitions, people's disordered desires, and rebelling against that.
Ooh.
Like the first person you go after is the high school's PE teacher, because he's abusing students.
Oh.
And he sees the whole school like his own castle.
Don't do that.
Yeah. And so you literally go through his distorted view of the school, which is a castle, and are going after his treasure, which is the thing that gave him the distorted desires in the first place. And for him, it's an Olympic gold medal.
Oh, shit.
Yeah, he was a gold medalist, and people gave him a lot of expectations. And in his words, what's wrong with having a reward for that? His reward, abusing his students and sexually harassing the female students.
Yikes.
Yep.
That's a fun concept. I mean...
Oh, it's incredibly fun. Highly recommend it. It's a super fun time. Persona 3's theme, and it's why it's my favorite, is... the concept of death.
Oh.
Memento Mori is a big part of it. Yeah. I'm not going to spoil, mostly for my roommate's sake.
Well, especially if they remake it. Then hopefully they won't remake it just for the new gen consoles. Hopefully we'll get like an Xbox One, PS4 remake.
No, when the trailer has the Xbox logo as soon as you see it.
Is it like the new gen Xbox?
I think so.
Because if they release it for PS5, then it's like, well,
no, it's new gen Xbox. They're going to be releasing it for Xbox.
Is it
pretty sure
exclusive?
PlayStation 5. It is not exclusive because I have pre-ordered it on Steam and it's coming February 1st, and I'm super excited about it.
That's fair. I guess I can always do Steam.
But yeah, super super hype about it. They tackle death in many many ways. Through the cast and the social links that you go through. And it just looks fucking phenomenal. And I just love that cast. I think everyone there is interesting and they all have interesting perspectives on things. And that's why it's my personal favorite.
So have you been replaying Persona 3 or just Persona 5?
I'm doing Persona 5 Royal right now. I have Persona 3 Portable on Steam, so I could be playing through that, but I really just want the full experience again when the remake comes out, which is not too far from here.
They are releasing it for Xbox XS. I don't know what the fuck that is. Xbox One, PS4, and PS5.
Yep.
Along with Steam. So, if it releases on PS4, I mean, I wouldn't mind getting... Because I've always wanted to try the Persona games.
It's a good one to start at. And I think, honestly, you're probably going to really enjoy it just because the themes are so strong.
Mm-hmm.
Like, all the Persona games, like, deal in the 1 year concept. You have until the end, like, the beginning of next year to really get everything you want done. Persona 3 tackles that in one of the most interesting ways.
Okay.
So, yeah, I can't recommend it enough. I've talked enough about it, so...
This podcast is based on ranting,
no.
So...
But yeah, I've been in Persona kick, and I'm just super excited for it. Once it comes out, that's probably going to be my next week. Not next week's, but week after.
Out.
Whenever it comes out, it's probably going to be a weekly obsession again.
Is it coming out soon, or...?
February 1st.
Oh, shit.
Yeah.
Like, very, very soon. Oh, okay.
Very, very soon. I've already pre-ordered it. Like, I'm getting that shit.
Sometimes pre-orders are like, alright, it'll release in, like, 6 months.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, February 1st. So.
Damn. I won't be getting it that soon, though.
Yeah. Anyhow, what's your weekly obsession this week?
Much worse. Much cringier. Much fangier.
I think I know what it is because I was hearing it in the
You don't,
car.
actually. It is the book called Crave by Tracy Wolff.
Crave.
So
it's not Twilight?
Well, we'll get into this.
Okay.
This is probably going to take 15 to 20 minutes.
I heard.
Take Twilight.
Uh-huh.
Put it in an Alaskan boarding school. Mix it.
Love it.
With dragons.
Okay.
Wolf shifters.
Love
which are
it.
werewolves. And witches.
This sounds like a book series my mom would really love.
Put it... Written by a 40-year-old woman who thinks she's a 16-year-old's teen in Tumblr eras. And you've got Crave. It's super weird. I got to work on Friday, and one of my coworkers was like, you need to start listening to this. Because we listen to Audible books together. And she's like, you need to. She's like, it's cringy, it's bad. And I was like, alright. She was talking to another one of my coworkers because we all process clothes together. And like they were giggling to each other because I came in at 12, they worked at 8, so they had like 4 hours where I guess they were just talking about this.
Oh yeah.
So I started listening to it. First of all, love the book. 8.5 out of 10.
Love it.
It's so good. The only things that are what is kind of cringy is just it's very self-realizing. Like it's the character because it's written in 2020. And I'm assuming it takes place in that ish time frame, because like the main character Grace wears like a Harry Styles t-shirt and starts talking about Harry Styles, and each of the chapter names are like a reference in something. Like one of them I think is like, in gym no one can hear you scream, which is a reference to aliens in space. And so, like, each chapter is some sort of pop culture reference, and but it's very, like, there's a line, I think in, like, halfway through the book, where she's like, this feels like some YA book, and that, like, this is weird, it is a YA, it is a young adult book,
yeah.
And so it's very, like, oh, it knows, but it doesn't know, but I started listening to it. It's 16 hours on Audible. It's free on Audible, which is why I think this whole thing came into existence, is when you have a membership, Audible gives you a bunch of free titles, you have thousands of them. And so the first book was free, and I was like, alright, I'll give it a try.
Yeah.
And so I started listening to it. Immediately I was like, I love this book so much. It's got a pretty dark premise where the main girl, Gracie, loses her parents a month ago due to a car accident.
Yeah.
And so she's familyless in California. She has an uncle that is the headmaster to the boarding school in Alaska, and he's like, hey, come stay with us. It's your family. She goes there, and it's that kind of classic Twilight, like moving to a new place, and it's very different, and it's very strange, but it's Alaska. In fall, so a core idea of the frog is moving again.
There you go.
My boyfriend has a pet frog, and rarely does he move, but he has moved. It deals a lot with like being cold and like dealing with the sub-freezing temperatures, which was funny because this was during when we started to get snow and it started to drop. But she moves and she gets introduced into this character called Jackson Vega, who is...
What a name!
Spelled Jaxon.
Oh my god.
Vega.
Take my top off now.
Oh my god, he's tall. He's got broad shoulders. He's fit. He wears all black, like black t-shirt, black jeans.
Love it.
His hair is described as like covering his face, but not like the emo bang cover. It more feels like just almost like a middle part that kind of covers both sides, or is flipped to one side. Has a scar on one of his eyes. Pale as hell. And our main girl Grace gets introduced to him, and he's a dick. He's like, get the fuck out of the school. We don't want you here.
It's that bad boy energy.
Yes, but she's like, I can sense something within his cold, dark eyes.
There's a soul in him.
Yeah, like I can see the warmth. And what I really enjoy is that the way the author kind of puts it is she is slightly a damsel in distress, but it's not really in that sense where our main girl is kind of doing it to herself. She's very funny and she's very witty. She's very independent with a lot of things, and she comes back at Jackson with this sort of like quitty kind of back and forth, like, I'm not going to back down to you just because you're going to tell me to fuck off.
It just sounds like a better Twilight, honestly.
It's a different Twilight. What makes it worse is the fact that the language is very cringy. One of the first things she said is like, God, he's an asshole. Or she doesn't actually cuss. She's like, God, he's rude, but he's sexy AF.
Oh my god.
And like, that's kind of the lingo she uses. Like, there's a couple times where she's like, God, FML, or like, he's hot AF, or this is, it's that kind of cringy.
Yeah, that cringy, like, texture language.
But it's a great book, and I am going to spoil it because I want to talk about it, so skip ahead 10, 15 minutes.
I have no idea.
He's a vampire, obviously.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And she spends about half the book not realizing it, because it's one of those good, fun things I do enjoy, which is this sort of... She doesn't come to that idea because it's in that time frame where it's like, well, why did this happen? Like, we live in 2020. These don't exist. And I'm not... She kind of just chalks it up to, like, accidents or... and the way the author writes it is very clever about setting it up where we kind of know it's mythological creatures, but can be easily explained to, like, an accident or to a freak kind of something. Like, the main book follows this sort of idea that she's having a lot of freak accidents has happened to her. The first scenario is, like, during one of the nights, the first night she's there, she's like, oh, I'm kind of bored, I can't sleep, I'm going to get up and walk around the boarding school, which is a castle, first of all.
So it's Hogwarts.
Kind of, yeah. Without, like, the building itself being magical. But she runs into two boys who try jokingly throw her in Alaska night weather, which is like -10 degrees, as a joke. Obviously, our main boy Jackson comes in and saves her. And there's hints where he's like, oh, they're just... Like, the two boys are like, oh, sorry, the moon's full, or, like, how the moon gets to us. Like, they make hints that, she might be able to get, but she's very much like, okay, they tried killing me, thank you for saving me. And then we fast forward, like, the next day where there's a big snowball fight, and one of the dudes, like, climbs a tree, and she climbs it with him to, like, throw snowballs, and the tree branch breaks, and the dude, like, jumps out and, like, covers her and, like, takes the fall, so, like, she sprains her ankle, but it's this, like, freak accident. And then we move forward where, towards the end of the book, she has almost an entire chandelier dropped on her.
Jesus.
And, of course, Jackson Vega is there to save her. But that's sort of this idea is, like, something's bad's happening to her, and she's kind of being able to chalk it up to just weirdness, or, Alaska's kind of weird. It's just strange. But, obviously... her sexy crush, Jackson Vega, who is a vampire, obviously is like, something's wrong, and he's very protective of her. And it's this... What I like about it, and what really drew me to it, is that it is both a very quick relationship, which at times... I don't want to read 6 books about them slowly falling in love. Sometimes you just want a book where they fall in love quickly, and it's beautiful. And he is very much a broken, kind of bad boy character, but quickly on, she says to herself, she is not there to fix him, she is just there to share his burden. She just wants to learn about him. And you learn that Jackson Vega is a vampire prince.
Of course he is.
Who killed his brother. Which is explained very heavily, because we meet another girl named Leah, Lia.
Good lord.
Yeah, the naming convention is very weird. You meet a girl named Leah who becomes kind of one of Grace's friends, because the whole school's kind of against her because she's human. But Leah, we know as a vampire, she doesn't really learn until much later. But Leah is kind of close to her. She makes tea a lot, which reminds her of her mother. Turns out Jackson's brother, Hudson, is Leah's boyfriend. Year ago, Hudson died, which is all we're told for almost the entire book. And then towards the end of it, you learn that Jackson kills him because Hudson is a genocidal psychopath who was oldest brother, like next heir of the vampire throne, and essentially was like, so we're gonna like kill all the wolf shifters, we're gonna kill all the witches, we're gonna kill all the dragons, and like, oh yeah, we're also gonna kill all the bitten vampires, not born vampires. And so our main boy Jackson is like, that's genocide. Like, I physically cannot let you do this. And he kills him. Which is like this big, like, oh, like, I'm sorry, but also thank you. Like, Grace kind of has to deal with this. He's obviously torturing himself about it.
Well, yeah, because he had to kill his brother.
But he's also like, I'd do it again, because I'm not going to let him do that. And so, that is like the sub point. And then you learn... Real spoilers for like the last 3 hours of the book. Leah hates Jackson, obviously, because he killed his brother, her boyfriend. For the entire book, has plotted to kill Leah, or to kill Grace, our main girl, in a ritual to bring him back. She set up the plan. She set up the freak car accident. She killed Grace's parents.
Oh no!
Put the idea in the headmaster, her uncle, Grace's uncle, to bring Grace here, and she essentially has been saved, like, leading it up so that way she can sacrifice Grace to bring back Hudson. And you learn those freak accidents were the dragons trying to kill Grace because they couldn't stop Leah, because I think she was just too powerful. She's a vampire. They couldn't stop her, so they were like, well, if we can't stop the vampire, we're going to kill the human, which is the catalyst. So those freak accidents were all sort of the dragon being like, well, sorry, but we can't let him come back. But it's a beautiful book. If you can look past those kind of cringy things, it's this beautiful love story of her fighting desperately to have Jackson kind of open up and to share his sorrows, and Jackson being very much also in love, but the whole book is on her perspective, or in her perspective, so you're very much like, does he love her? Like, he's obviously showing very, like, emotional acts of love, and there's been this whole gag that, like, there's been earthquakes, which is not really uncommon in Alaska, but they've been happening frequently. You learn Jackson has psychic powers, which all vampires have some form of, like, a power. His is, like, telekinesis, and the earthquakes have been happening when he thinks about Grace, because he doesn't know how to control his love for her. And he's been, because he's Vampire Prince, he's so powerful that, like, it's literally shaking the earth.
Boy's getting so roused, he's just like, I'm shaking the earth, I don't know what to do.
And it's been this, like, it's this cute thing where it's like, okay, towards the end, they really start to open up, and they kill Leah, because it's this, I will say, the book is very PG, but those last, like, 3 hours are kind of graphic. Like, our main girl, Grace, gets kidnapped, put in, like, a sacrificial chamber, like, tied up. she like is like trying to break out of her bonds, like rubs her skin raw where it's like bleeding, and then you move into Leah, the evil vampire girl, fighting one of the dragons, and it's this like brutal fight. And I will say, our main girl Grace, we love her. She is such, for the most part, kind of an independent character. She is still a damsel in distress. But she has a moment where she's like, well, if I'm gonna fucking die, then the best I can do is try to drag Leah to hell with me.
Hell yeah.
And like tears apart like this ritual book that Leah needs to bring back Hudson, and like burns it, and she's like, if I'm gonna fucking die, like at least I'm just gonna try to mess everything up. Of course Jackson saves her. It's this really cute thing. But I was obsessed about it. I was like, it's so good, and then I fucked everything up because I read the wiki, which, once again, go read the first book if you're okay with the spoilers. Something happens in the later books I don't give a shit to read about anymore, because apparently, I gotta talk about this real quick. It gets a little too Wattpad-y for me at the end of the first book.
Yeah.
Because she's not just a human. We know she's a witch, which isn't too weird. The headmaster's a witch. Her cousin's a witch.
Is she half dragon?
No, it's much worse. Her dad was a witch, gave up his powers for his wife, which is a very classic story. Yeah. So she's not really... She's a witch bloodline, but she doesn't have powers. We learn at the end of the book she's also a gargoyle, which is another mythical race that hasn't been seen for 1,000 years, because apparently Hudson does come back. The ritual was a success and tries to kill Jackson in the middle of the school, and she like turns around and like apparently sucks up Hudson because he's like this weird mist form, and then turns to stone. And so the last chapter of the book is from Jackson's point of perspective, and he's like, what the fuck is happening to her? First, fully cusses in this last chapter, which isn't ever happened in any of the other chapters. He's like, what the fuck is wrong with her? Like, if she's dead, I'm gonna wipe this school off the face of the earth. Like, I don't think I could control my powers. And they're like, she's not dead, she's a gargoyle, she's like turned to stone. Only she can undo turning into stone. But I read the wiki, and she's a witch gargoyle demigod. Which apparently one of her mother's ancestors was the god of chaos.
Okay.
It gets much worse. Turns out Jackson Vega, her sexy vampire boyfriend, isn't her true mate, isn't her actual boyfriend. Because the demigod, or the god of chaos, forged a fake bond between them. And her real mate, her real love, is Hudson Vega, the genocidal vampire.
Why?
I have no fucking clue, and obviously they explain it in the second and third book, I think, but at that point, because like reading the wiki, it's like Hudson Vega, true mate, boyfriend, best friend, husbands, and I was like, what? This like took such a turn I never expected. I was like, honestly, I don't want to read it anymore.
Yeah.
Also she's Gargoyle Queen and he's Gargoyle King. Yeah, I was like, it's too Wattpad-y at that point.
I don't like to throw this term around very often because it gets a bad rep. But this is definitely one of those bad rep kind of moments for it. This is a Mary Sue.
Yeah.
This is a character who the world revolves around only this character.
For those that know of it, it's kind of Bleach towards the end, where Ichigo, our main character, is like, oh, he's a Soul Reaper, he's a Quincy, he's a Hollow, he's a human. Like, they just kind of start tacking shit on. And they try to explain it. That makes sense, obviously. But it's like, what the fuck? So I read the first book, and it was really good, but I was like, I don't have the heart to read the other books, knowing that this entire relationship between Grace and Jackson, which I kind of love, because he is a broken boy who's willing to show emotion, who's willing to kind of heal himself, is all for nothing.
Yeah.
And it's supposed to be with this literal genocidal psychopath, which apparently, I guess he's not anymore. I don't know. But I was like, I'm not reading this anymore.
Yeah, it sounds too fan-fiction-y.
So I switched to Twilight.
Really?
Well, because I've never read the Twilight books, and the books are so vastly different than the movies.
That is true.
I knew that even as a kid, that the way the books dealt with Bella and Edward's relationship was so different than what the movies showed. And I'm halfway through the book. Mm-hmm. It's only a 12-hour book on Audible, but it's beautiful. It's much more slice of life. It's not like the movies really show it to be this crazy, fast-paced, like, who are you? I'm a vampire kind of thing. Mm-hmm. No, it's very, like, she gets onto it early on. First of all, she does not make the connection that Edward's a vampire. It's Jacob who tells her.
Oh, really?
They have a whole beach scene where Jacob is like, Bella's like, well, why can't the Cullens come over here? And Jacob's like, well, I can't really tell you, but I will because, oh, you're a girl. And you kind of flirted with me. He's like, they're called the Cold Ones. Our ancestors, our native, elders told us, like, stories of us being these, like, wolfkin, like, werewolves, essentially. And they had Cold Ones who are these, like, dark, pale vampires. Mm-hmm. But he's, like, the main Cullen. Oh my god, what's Sexy Dad's name?
I have no idea. Robert?
No, it starts with a C.
Kristoff.
No, you just talking is gonna upset me.
Cal.
I want to say Cornelius, but that's so not right.
Celebrimbor.
Great name.
Mm-hmm.
Carlisle. That's
Carlisle. I wasn't too far off.
Carlisle is sort of the dad of the group. But Jacob's like, Carlisle's been around since my great-grandfather. Like, the Cullens are Cold Ones, or what you guys call as vampires. Jacob fully says it. And Bella isn't really like, no, it's not true. She kind of goes through this deductive reasoning of like, well, I don't know if it's myth, so let me look it up. Let me think about things that I've seen before, of the whole scene where Edward saves Bella from the car, and how he moves, and how he's always like there when she never sees him. And it's not this weird forest scene where she's like, I know who you are. He's like, say it. A vampire. Like, that doesn't happen. The big conflict comes when they're in a car. And she's like, well, I have a theory about what you are. And they don't explicitly say vampire, but it's so incredibly open of just like, she's like, well, there's a scene where she's like, do you sleep in coffins? And he's like, myth. And she's like, garlic? He's like, myth. And he's like, you're forgetting to ask the most important question. My diet. Like, they don't obviously say that he's a vampire, but it's so just casual.
Yeah.
Which is so nice compared to the movies, which is so dramatized. But I've been enjoying it. It's honestly a much, I don't want to say healthier, because she really falls head over heels for him quickly. But it's much more of a slow-paced, kind of slice of life feeling to it. So I'm excited to read more of the books. But shitty Wattpad vampire stories has really been the weekly obsession.
That's fun.
And guess what? I'm not apologizing for it.
Yep.
You know what I'm going to read next? Oh my god, what is it called? The Chronicles of Vladimir Todd. Which, if you don't know, is about a vampire in 8th grade. And he's male, and he's hot. And it's, first of all, we don't get very many male vampire point of views.
We really don't.
Like, it's always like either a human girl that falls in love with a male vampire, but this is from a male vampire's point of view. And it goes through his 8th grade, his 9th grade, 12th, or 11th grade, and 12th grade.
I mean, my mom was in a kick with these types of books and genre and stuff like that. She took me to go see the first Twilight movie when I was very young. And she took me because she was like, the baseball scene is going to be really fun for him. He's going to love that. And I did. The baseball scene is actually really cool.
I haven't got to it in the book yet. I think I'm getting to it soon.
In the movie, it's super cool.
Oh, it's a really cool scene.
Yeah.
We also meet the, I can't remember what they're called, but the little coven of vampires that then begins to hunt Bella, James, and his girl and the other dude.
Yep.
I'm excited for that scene in the books, too.
But that's the only thing I really remember about the movie of Twilight. That's the only experience I've gotten with Twilight.
I've obsessively watched them. When Breaking Dawn Part 1 came out, because I got good grades in school, that was my reward.
Was
got
going to see
that
Breaking
movie
Dawn?
in theaters, me and my mom. And guess what? I cried.
Hey, there you go.
I love those movies. Now, obviously, they're super cringy, and reading the books, I don't dislike the movies, but they really do change a lot of things. Edward in the books is like golden hair, golden eyes. Obviously, Robert Pattinson plays him as dark, brooding emo, but in the books, he's like angelic voice, angelic face, cold, not cold, but kind of quiet, but does not shy away from like using his looks to like charm people. But God, in those movies, he's just emo. I could just hear My Chemical Romance being played. But
all right. Well, I think this is a good time to transition into why everyone would be listening.
About vampires.
About vampires, yes. This is now the vampire podcast.
There's no reason for me not to switch today's topic about vampires. But no, sci-fi. We are talking about isolation within sci-fi, which is one of my favorite forms of, or one of my favorite tropes within sci-fi. I don't really like horror. I don't mind horror. I'm not a huge fan of AI. I'm not a huge fan of like time travel. I really love space and I love isolation.
Yep.
For those that don't know, sci-fi or science fiction is a form of fiction that deals primarily with the impact of the actual or imagined sciences upon society or individuals. So we deal with things that are realistic in some sense, and then a lot of sci-fi is this fun feeling of getting to make up a sort of science and then be like, well, this is how this science works in my mind. It's a genre where speculative fiction contains a lot of imagined elements that mostly don't exist in the real world, almost ever. It spans a wide range of themes, often exploring time travel, space travel. They're usually set in the future and deal with consequences of technological and scientific advances.
Yeah,
that's sort of a core mechanic of sci-fi is what happens when humanity advances to the point of space travel or to high technological advances. Specifically, there are two not subgenres of sci-fi, but there's two categories of sci-fi. There's hard science fiction and there's soft science fiction. Hard science fiction is based on scientific fact. They are inspired by a hard natural science like physics, chemistry, and astronomy. I tend to like hard science fiction more because it makes it more believable. And then there's soft science fiction, which kind of is opposite, where that's
your Star Wars, Star Trek.
Star Trek is more of a hard science fiction.
Really?
They're the races, but the way they kind of explain things. Soft science fiction is like Dune.
Okay.
Dune's magic, Bene Gesserit's sisters, like Star Wars is also very soft. Like the Force, like what is the Force? It's not really explained. Well, it's explained by these microorganisms within the universe, but it's a very soft magic system. I'd argue Star Trek is very hard because it kind of talks about things. There's not really anything that you're like, well, this is just magic. It's like photon, like stun guns, and it's like travel and all that stuff. Another example of, in a sense, like a hard magic system would be, I'll talk about it later, but like Starfield, the game. It's a little bit soft magic system because they have a weird kind of like the artifacts which kind of give you powers, but for the most part, it is based within a hard magic system world or hard science fiction world. Soft science fiction can be explained as either not scientifically accurate or inspire a soft social sciences like psychology, anthropology, and sociology. So science fiction movies or video games where we deal a lot with the what is the human race, what is existence kind of thing, and don't really deal much more with don't really deal with science. A great example would be I'm trying to think of it. I don't know. 2001: Space Odyssey. Which is a good science fiction, one of the cult classics, but it deals mostly in like what happens when we come across a thing that rapidly evolves whatever it touches. And it's more of a sociological conflict between an AI and the human crew, and it's less about the sciences of the world, about like how space travel works and how this works. It's more of just, am I human? What does it mean to be human? do I deserve this consciousness, essentially. So that's what science fiction is. We all love science fiction. I forget how wide range science fiction is.
Yeah.
Like, when I think of science fiction, I think of Star Trek, I think of Star Wars, Dune. There's, like, I forget things like Terminator are science fiction. AI, robots, like, that's full space travel, Back to the Future. Obviously, people... And because I think I don't enjoy that genre much, I don't really think about those. I tend to think about what I enjoy, but do you have a favorite science fiction?
Oh boy, so a lot of my science fiction stuff either comes from, like, I'm more of a fantasy nerd, and that's just kind of where
I love science fiction fantasy.
Science fiction fantasy is super fun, but I am definitely more of a fantasy nerd, and have recently delved into the worlds of, like, sci-fi. Like, I just recently saw the Jedi movies, the Star Wars movies.
The Jedi movies?
Do you see how much of a...
Yeah. Wait, all 6 Star Wars movies?
Not all 6. I've seen the prequels.
So the new... Not the newer ones, but the, like, 2000s one. Okay.
Yeah. I've seen
rough
those.
Start, but...
Yeah, rough start. I found it fun, but...
I do love those movies more than society love those movies because I like the actionness of it.
Oh, yeah. There's definitely some moments where I'm like, really?
Yeah.
But, no, I had a lot of fun with them. I want to see the other ones. And the rest of my, like, honestly, sci-fi stuff has been more games in general.
Writing the notes for this, I was like, it's hard not to include games because when dealing with isolation, which we'll talk about in a second, it's easier to do that in a video game form.
Well, because the video game is so tied to the player.
Yeah.
It's much easier to feel that sense of isolation because there's only so much a program can do.
Yeah.
But, like, in terms of, like, my personal favorite kind of, like, sci-fi stuff, I tend to lean more soft sci-fi. So, like, Hyper Light Drifter has a lot of sci-fi elements to it.
It's a mostly science fiction fantasy video game.
No, you're right. But it also has, like, magic and stuff to it and everything.
That's why I tend to like soft sci-fi at times, because they do get to play around with magic, such things like the Force and all that. And then Dune's weird, presence.
Like, I plan on my world that I'm making to be more of a soft sci-fi. Like, I still want to be able to explain how stuff works, but it's not going to work, like, because I'm not a scientist who understands the realms of physics and stuff. It's not going to work exactly how, like, things should. I'm just going to be like, oh yeah, this is a gun that shoots lasers sometimes because lasers are cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's kind of more my shtick. I really like Hyper Light Drifter. I like the Alien movies. I think they're really fun.
We'll talk about Aliens in a second.
Terminator I kind of grew up on. Kind of. I more was escorted out of the room when Terminator was on. But, like, the bits that I got to see of Terminator I really enjoyed. When it was just me and my grandpa, he didn't care. I fucking watched, like, the scary movies with him and Ace Ventura and stuff. But whenever the rest of the family was there, it was like, okay, Lucas, you shouldn't see this. Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at.
I grew up a lot on sci-fi, from being a kid and watching Treasure Planet, Titan AE.
Treasure Planet! I forgot all about that. I love Treasure Planet.
I'm trying to think of others. Then we get into things like The Fifth Element.
Yes, I love that movie.
Grew up on Star Wars. Grew up playing Lego Star Wars my entire life.
Oh my god, the vaults have been opened. I see now. There are more sci-fi things than I thought.
And then getting to the point now where it's Dune. I love the Dune series.
I still need to get into that.
It's a hard read. It's like the Silmarillion from Tolkien. It's a very rough read. Not long, size-wise, but will take a long time to read. Aliens, grew up on. Loved more Aliens versus Predator because I like Predators more. than kind of
Predators
aliens.
are cool. That's fair.
But yeah, what we move on to then is we define what sci-fi is. Then let's need to define on what is isolation. How do you define isolation? Because there's a couple different definitions. The first, we have essentially 3 definitions that are slightly different in what they deal with in isolation. The first is to select from others or among others. To pick something out is to isolate it, which we see in a couple movies that the cast or the crew, whatever the sci-fi thing is, may not be a single person, but may be a group of people who dislike either the main character or who the main character stands out in some sort of sense. So they are isolated, though they are not alone.
Yes.
The second definition is to be alone, which we see a lot in space sci-fi movies, especially when dealing with human psychology or the question of what is it to be human. There's a lot of movies that deal with just a single human in space, and it's their journey through something. And then the third definition is similar to the first one, but it is to set apart from others, which can be a mixture of the first two, which is you can either be within a group of people and to set yourself apart, or to be a single entity that has set themselves apart from something else. Great example from this definition, I would say, is WALL-E.
Yeah.
WALL-E really sets himself apart from others. He's not being selected out of a group. He has sort of set himself different. He's the only one that survives the test of time, but he really sets himself apart from the other robots in a sense, though he is alone.
Yeah.
No one kind of really was like, all right, WALL-E, you're going to be by yourself now. Or, in a sense, he doesn't choose to be by himself. But what does isolation really mean to us?
That's a good question, because isolation can come in kind of many forms.
Yeah.
And isolation doesn't necessarily need to be a bad thing either.
No.
Buddhist monks or just monk, being a monk in general is about isolating yourself from the common world, finding solace in yourself,
Absolutely.
and the world around you. I think one of the best feelings of isolation I've ever felt, and I mean this best in the sense of it made me feel isolated, but in a good way.
Isolation is one of those words that come with a negative connotation, like consequence.
Exactly.
Consequence is not a bad thing. We just carry that word with a negative consequence, or with a negative connotation. Isolation can be a good thing.
Very much so.
Almost every single introvert is based on the fact that they enjoy isolating themselves from groups of people, and that's how they recharge, that's how they rest. But you make a very good point that it is very much not a bad thing.
It's not. And one of the best feelings of isolation I ever got to experience was, I'm a farm kid. My nana used to own a farm, and I would go and help be a farmhand every once in a while, just to do some work in the summer and stuff like that. They owned a good amount of land, and they had these trails that I could kind of follow. And there was this one night where we were all kind of over this one part in the trails that's next to the river. We were doing a bonfire. Sorry, I'm just going into a story. But we were right next to the woods as well. And when I walked into the woods, not too far, but far enough to where I wasn't hearing the noise of everyone, I found a pond.
Ooh.
And the moon wasn't full, but it was bright enough, and it was right above, and I could see all the stars and just hear the sounds of nature around me. And I just laid down in the grass next to the pond and looked at the stars for a good 10 minutes. 10 minutes because people came to try to find me because they were like, where the fuck is Lucas? But
oh god, he's gone missing.
He's gone missing. But that was one of the most the nicest versions of isolation I've ever experienced.
Can I ask why it felt nice? Because if the answer is what I think it is, it'll lead beautifully into the next topic.
Because I was 11 and really trying to figure out where I was in the world. And...
Ding, ding, ding.
Yeah. And for me, it was the representation of, I am just small.
Absolutely. I knew it.
And not taking that, a lot of people can interpret that as, I'm small, therefore nothing matters and this is terrible.
Mm-hmm.
I see it in a very different sense of like, I am small, therefore nothing matters. Therefore, the only thing that matters is what I think matters.
Absolutely.
And what other people thinks matter. So I shall live my life. And that's good. That being 11-year-old, that was really like an eye-opening. Like, I shall live my life doing the things that I find matter.
Absolutely. That is the main core mechanic on why I love isolation in sci-fi.
Mm-hmm.
Because and we'll talk about it a little bit second. I do want to talk about something else before we get to that, which is why I love sci-fi. Because it talks about that concept of realizing you are so infinitesimally small within the universe. And, 11-year-old you only had the world to think about.
Mm-hmm.
When you deal with space travel and you can see the thousands of galaxies, that concept gets even grander to the point where it's almost incomprehensible of just how infinitely small you are.
Yeah.
But before we get to that, my next question is, when does it become isolation? And it's not really, it's more of a rhetorical question, because you can't really answer that, because it's usually based on the media we look at.
Mm-hmm.
We see it a lot in movies that isolation is either, like all plot points, beginning, middle, or end. Either a character starts the journey out isolated and grows, if it is a happy story, into a communal setting,
mm-hmm.
or they don't. A great example of not is Blade Runner. At least Blade Runner 2049 starts isolated, ends isolated.
Yeah.
And we don't get really an in-between. If it's middle, at some point maybe they started out as a group and then became isolated and then continue the journey that way.
Mm-hmm.
Which Alien is kind of a great example. The whole crew's kind of there in the beginning, middle sort of conflict. Ripley is by herself in a sense,
mm-hmm.
and she kind of continues her journey through that. It's a bit more towards the end that happens, but that's kind of the example I have. And then the end is you spend the whole story with people.
Yeah.
And it's that last terrifying moment where you're the only survivor, especially in space. And so one thing that we see different from movies and video games is that video games don't really follow that.
Nope.
And we see isolation more in video games because you are playing the character. So in a sense, you're really never alone because it's you and the character you're playing.
Mm-hmm.
And you have this sense of either you're with them or you are them, but you always kind of have someone else.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot of video games where you're sort of the only person.
Well, okay. Isolation can kind of come into very, very weird ways, and there's the good and the bad. The good isolation, I feel, is where you are taking yourself out of the equation to do some introspection.
Mm-hmm.
Whether that be leaving your peers or just being alone in a sense to do introspection.
Mm-hmm.
The bad way of isolation is forced isolation.
Yeah.
Where either, for whatever circumstance, whether it be the peers walking away, having an argument or something, or, just death of other peers because of a horrible alien, there's the isolation that is forced and that never feels good because there's no introspection of that. It's more something that you don't feel you were enough on, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely. Especially when it comes to some sort of thing is killing the rest. Rarely do you get the chance to go, okay, so what is humanity?
Yes.
It's more of just, how do I survive this?
Mm-hmm.
But that concept of, well, how do I survive this? If survive, then immediately lead to, then what am I? If I'm the only survivor, why did I survive? How did I survive? And it is just me now. To answer my question of when does it become isolation, I know I said it was rhetorical, but I wrote it in a sense that's very not answery answer.
Yeah.
For me, the point when something becomes isolated is when that thing perceives its reality to be isolation.
Yes.
Which is where we can get things where they can be massive group settings and still be alone. We see it a lot, and I kind of note this, we see it a lot with teenagers, especially in depression, where they are surrounded with people, but their perceived reality is that they are alone. And we get that a lot in everything. That's anytime something is alone, it's because they have perceived themselves as alone. Because when they don't, even if they are, the few examples are like, oh, someone's crazy, but they're hearing voices. They're not alone in their eyes.
Making themselves feel like the outcast in a sense. And that can also lead, that could have happened because others made them feel like they are they are an outcast in a sense. Or just, trauma.
But unless the main character or who we're dealing with, if they don't see themselves as alone, it's hard for us to see them as alone then. Whether they're talking to a robot NPC or their self. A great example, actually, which isn't sci-fi, but is an example of sometimes not being alone, Senua's Sacrifice.
Yes.
It's an entire game built on the main girl having schizophrenia, like PTSD, like she hears voices, and though we sometimes see her as alone, the whole gimmick is that she's consistently talking to herself because of the voices.
Yep.
So it's hard to see it as she is isolated, because she kind of has people around. And then it's the descent into madness, but regardless. Do you feel isolated when you don't have friends?
When I don't have friends? In what sense? Like...
So you don't have friends, in general.
Just in general?
No, it's... The question is, do you surround yourself with friends to specifically remove isolation? Because, like you said, isolation can be a good thing. But at what point do you... And how do you sort of remove that?
That's a good question. I think sometimes I do. But I think the thing I use to more deafen isolation, because to me, isolation is noise. It's going into my own head. And the way I usually deafen isolation is not... Sometimes it's through other people, but usually it's more through activity. Like having to listen to music, listening to a podcast, having an activity to focus on. I think that's what I use.
Which is a very fun concept of, you are still isolated.
Yeah.
So it's the difference between that character's perspective of isolation and then us as a third party as isolation. Because this is all within sci-fi.
Yeah.
As we as viewers are consuming something. But we see that a lot. People who are traveling alone who may not feel isolated because they have movies or books within space or within sci-fi, but we are still viewing them as alone.
Yeah.
And so, again, one of those rhetorical questions of like, well, if you surround yourself with friends, does that remove the isolation? Is it only when you have a good time and you no longer think you're alone? Because the amount of times I, as an introvert, has joined a group setting and have felt even more alone, even though I'm with a group of people.
I think isolation is a sense. It's not necessarily it's a feeling. It's not... It's a hard thing to answer. The only thing I can give is my perspective on it, and I say a lot of words, and don't think I'm a professional.
And we don't have time.
Yeah, but to me, isolation is perspective. It always has been and always will be. It's the perspective that we view our own self in. If I view myself as alone, even though I am surrounded by people, I am still isolated. And that can be depressing in a lot of areas because you don't want to feel alone. And there's many reasons you could feel alone, whether you don't feel the subject matter pertains to you, or
mental health,
feeling as though like, oh, we were talking about this thing, but now we're not talking about it anymore, and so that's the only thing I really wanted to talk about. So now I'm just kind of sitting here quietly, and now I feel alone, kind of thing. It's interesting because isolation can be very healthy, but only in the sense of whether that feeling of isolation comes from you wanting the isolation versus you not wanting the isolation.
Absolutely. To piggyback off that and ask yet another rhetorical question,
sure,
because that's sort of what the concept of this is, and we'll talk about it a little bit when we talk about examples, is what is more important?
Mm-hmm.
The person's I'm trying to think of the right word. Self-respect. We're not perspective. Let me just restate that statement. What is more valued, or at least more important, when a person defines themselves as isolated and alone, or when society defines that person as alone? Because it kind of re-talk about everything we just said, but it really goes back to, okay, if we're looking at a person, person A, and they see themselves as alone, is that more important or more influential than society seeing person A as alone? What takes more precedence? Because if person A goes, oh, I'm not alone, but the entire society goes, no, you are, is that not isolating?
It can be if it affects that person, and if there's genuine proof, but rarely are we ever actually alone. There's always people we can reach out to.
Yeah.
And I would say the more important and the one that affects the most is your own perception of your isolation. Again, I am not a fucking therapist. I am speaking out of my ass right now. But
you do.
It is based, because what hurts more? Is it you feeling that you were alone, or is it, the only reason somebody telling you that you feel isolated hurts is because you already feel isolated in the first place. And it's just reinforcing it, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's the only reason it hurts. So if you tell somebody who genuinely does not feel like they are isolated, that they are isolated, they're not going to take that.
Yeah.
They're going to be, no, I'm not. I have this, and this. Or they'll give you examples and stuff like that.
So society telling someone that they're isolated only really matters when it begins to change that person's perspective on if they're isolated or not.
Exactly. And it only honestly hurts if you already are feeling the senses of isolation in the first place.
Yeah, I think that's a very beautiful way of stating it. I love this concept within sci-fi.
Yeah.
Specifically, and the quickest way to talk about it is the feeling of existential dread that comes with human psyche.
Yes.
Which is, for the most, because rarely do we talk about isolation in a good sense. It usually deals with this existential feeling of mortality and death, of what is life, who are we as people.
I mean, Alien Isolation is about you being alone with an alien-infested ship.
Absolutely.
Trying to survive. Like, that in itself is isolating as shit.
And you got to think about, like, well, what does this matter? Why do I matter? If I'm the only person, is my struggle even worth it? If I don't know the end, why do I do this? I find it really helps us as watchers to kind of connect with the isolated individual, especially as we are, for the most part, spending a majority of time with them. Because for the most part, it's usually the main character. Rarely do we care about an isolated individual that's a third-party individual. Mostly the main character. So we connect almost immediately with them. If they are alone, then we have to feel alone because we are sharing the story through their eyes. And that's sort of the first main reason. The second reason is that isolation really helps remove or block out distractions when dealing with that person. You know, if there's not a cast to talk about that might be like, well, how do they react to each other? How is the relationship with the other, like, team? You know, Alien is a great example of, like, how does Ripley deal with the other people? What's her relationship? What's their history? Once those people are gone, we can sort of just focus on the main character. And then we get to those questions of what if, or what is. I lost my thought. Thirdly, it brings up the question of, which I really love, if we are to advance the human race, as shown a lot in science fiction, then how are we to deal with the ever-expanding? If we are already, as a society, isolated, or at least a majority of us feel alone, what happens when you expand that beyond galaxies? Does the level of isolation grow? Does it stay consistent? It's one of those things I wish I could see a graph of, you know, in Earth, how many people are alone, that they believe are isolated or, you know, by themselves. Then when you expand that to a lot of science fictions, which is multi-galaxy, multi-universe, does the number of isolated individuals grow, or does it stay the same based on population?
That's a fascinating take on it, because, you know, it really depends on what that isolation is going to do to a person in a weird sense. Yeah, I don't know. That's I don't know how to answer that.
It's not really that's the hard part. It's not really a question. It's just one of those things that I was like, I wish I could see. You know, the level of graphs, or, like, you know, a bullet point, like whatever form they want to show it of. Just what's the level of isolation, the percentage of isolation now? Yeah. And then, you know, taking whatever film of media you want, and then what's the level of isolation in that universe based on the people there, what they're doing. Does it stay this consistent based on population? Because classically in sci-fi, you get planets that exist full of people. Then you get the space travel where it's like that one ship where no one's on it, or just one person's on it. But it's why I love sci-fi as a concept, because, like you explained when you were 11, being alone hits you with the, I am nothing, and the universe is ever expanding, so why do I care? And you care either because you want to, or you don't care because you don't have to. And the kind of how it falls of, you do something because you want to, because there is no reason for it. You do good for the sake of doing good, or you just don't give a shit because there is no reason to give a shit. But yeah, I love isolation. So to talk about some examples, you've already named the first one, and we've named it a few times, Alien. 1997 from now. Movies, games, specifically the name Alien Isolation, the video game. You start with, like, it's like a crew of 3 people, 4 people.
It's like 4 or 5 people.
And you are trying to find your mother. You, I think, plays the daughter of Ripley.
No, you play as Ripley.
I think you play the daughter of Ripley.
No, you play as Ripley.
Do you?
Yeah. You play as Ripley, and you're trying to find your mother. Yeah. And, or at least you're trying to find more details about your mother, because this, you know, this ship that you're going on.
Wrong.
Really?
You play Amanda Ripley, the daughter of Alien protagonist Ellen Ripley.
Oh.
That's what I thought the entire premise was, is that you're seeking your mother, who is Ripley, the main girl.
Okay, well, I didn't know that. That makes a lot more sense.
Which also then talks about another thing of, is it weird to seek someone knowing that blah blah. But yeah, you follow the daughter looking for your mother, who I don't even think is there. I can't. It's been so many years since I've played the game.
I don't remember.
But you're almost completely alone.
Yeah, you detach from the ship. Your communications goes pretty fucking fast. Like 2 of your crew members died just trying to board the ship that you're trying to go on. And then it's just you. And
just you.
It's just you, and you're alone. And you see people, but you see them dying to the xenomorphs that are crawling around the entirety of the ship. And at that point, you're just trying to survive. You don't even talk to anyone.
Yeah. And it's this, like, it's back to the question of why fight? Mm-hmm. It's the same thing of, like, why do you care if nothing is anything? Mm-hmm. And it is such a struggle, and the ship is so infested. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, it ends with the sort of question of, like, well, if I can't survive, I'm going to take as much down with me as I can.
Yeah. Well, okay. So, here's the thing that I tend to subscribe to, and this goes more into philosophical stuff. Mm-hmm. You have to kind of give yourself a purpose.
Absolutely.
Anna Ripley has a purpose in the sense that she's trying to find more information about her mom. So she is continuing to go through this terrible isolation and survival mode to try to find more things about her mom. There's a lot of people who feel isolated and terrible, and my thing is, my message is, and this might not work for everyone, and I am not a professional. Please go seek professional help. But if you are feeling depressed, if you are feeling isolated, if you cannot get yourself out of a situation, take that time to really... Isolation is a time to reflect and look introspectively. Mm-hmm. Look into yourself. Why are you feeling these things? Why are you having this? Why is this happening to you?
Yeah.
There's many reasons that could be hurting, or situations that could be there. But take that time to really look into yourself and see what you can and can't change. Because some things you're just going to have to accept.
Yeah.
Whether they be good or bad. And give yourself a purpose to strive for.
Seek purpose, seek community. Once you find a purpose, then you can seek community with that purpose.
And usually by seeking purpose, you will find community.
Absolutely. Which is a massive concept within space. Mm-hmm. Because it's the exact same question of, like, well, in an infinite world, in an infinite universe, what am I doing?
Yeah.
And we'll talk about it later for an example of, well, what do you do? Mm-hmm. You have to give yourself something to do. Mm-hmm.
Also, don't feel bad if you can't find purpose, because that's a hard thing to find.
If you can't find a purpose, explore purposes.
That's the thing. You're not going to find it right away. Yeah. I still don't know my purpose in a lot of situations, but I find solace in the fact that I am searching for purpose.
Mm-hmm. Think of it as like taking little bites out of candy.
Exactly.
You're not having to eat the whole bag, but you'll nibble it. Mm-hmm. You're trying different purposes in life. Do I want to do this with myself? Do I want to do this? Do I really enjoy it when I, help and give others? Do I find it more satisfactory when I create things? Mm-hmm. I don't think in life you can find one purpose.
No.
I think purposes change as we experience life.
Because it's a lot of media, sci-fi included, mm-hmm. shows characters finding their one purpose in life, and that's what they do forever, or they accomplish their goal and now they feel satisfactory, and then roll credits. You don't see the end, you don't see the consequences.
Yeah.
So, and the thing is, a lot of those people, they might have accomplished their goals, but that means that their goals are done.
What's the next one?
And you have to continue to push for a purpose.
It's kind of what I dislike about classical fantasy settings, which is, princess, or, princess is captured, I've got to go rescue her, or evil dark wizard cursed something, so I, as the main character, young teen boy, have to go to the evil castle and, defeat the wizard, and then come home. It's like, well, what's their purpose then?
Yeah.
They have to exist outside, and you don't really, it is that, okay, if your entire purpose is to go defeat the evil wizard and you come back home, what are you doing now? Your story just doesn't end. Your life doesn't end. Obviously, that's where the movie ends.
Yeah.
But, that character needs a purpose.
And here's the thing, y'all. And not to be too preachy on this, I just feel very strongly about it. You're going to fail. That's just life. I've failed so much. We all fail so much. Mm-hmm. And, failure can suck. But failure is also an opportunity to learn. And I know that's easier said than done.
Yeah.
But, again, try to be introspective of it. Why did it fail? Why, ask questions about it instead of just pushing the, oh, well, I suck because I failed at this, or blah, blah, blah. No, ask questions. Why did it fail? Mm-hmm. And if it failed because of you, then what were the reasons it failed because of you?
Yeah.
And don't feel bad that it failed. And I know that's, again, easier said than done.
Yeah.
But ultimately, there's a lot of things that, especially our society, tries to push that failure is bad. You need success. You need to continue to put, and if you don't succeed, then you're a fucking loser. You're not the 1%, Purpose should be more than success.
Yeah. And the only way you fail at failure is by not learning.
And by giving up.
Yeah. If you fail and you refuse to learn, or if you give up, that's the only time you truly fail in life.
Sorry. Very deep conversation, but
But that's the thing. Yeah. Isolation does that. That's why I love it, is you immediately then go retrospective and you go, what is human existence? What is the purpose of human existence? And each of these examples we talk about delve within that, what we just had, the conversation of what does it mean to fail? Why do I care about this? And another one about finding purpose, which I love because it's another horror-based thing, Dead Space.
Yeah.
Dead Space is a purely... It's the entire game is almost isolation, where you play as Isaac, who is searching for his girlfriend who went missing. So, a purpose, but it's just through horribleness. Like, it's that question of, why are you fighting this? It's the same thing of Aliens. It's an unfightable cause.
And you're alone.
And everyone you find either dies or some fucked up person. But, yeah, Dead Space, I was looking up examples, and I was like, oh my god, Dead Space is. It's just you start, the first 15 minutes is I got a bunch of people, they're dead. They're all dead. Yeah. And there's a few of them that survive, and you're kind of going with them, but you're the only person that can kind of go out and do, possibly save the crew, and so you're journeying all alone.
Yeah.
So yeah, Dead Space was a fun one. The next example, which deals also more with psychology and sociology, is Ad Astra.
Now, I don't know this one.
This is a 2019 movie with, it's also dubbed Dad Astra, which we'll get to in a second.
Love it.
It follows the main character who, essentially, him and his father don't have a relationship for 30 years. And his father... I can't remember if his father's presumed dead or presumed missing, but is light years away. The father went to go do something, never came back. And the son essentially grew up 30 years later and is like, well, what do I do? And the story gets to the point where the people ask for the son to go seek out the father, because he's, I think, the only way, or the only person that has certain knowledge. And it's this, it's a difficult feeling in the movie of the main character, Roy, truly trying to find a purpose traveling to his father, who he hasn't seen in 30 years. So it's this mixture of, it is isolation, it's through space travel, it's this feeling of, I have a purpose, but is it really a good enough purpose to suffer through this? And also then trying to kind of talk about what we talked about in episode 2, which is family dynamics.
Yeah.
What happens when you what do you say to your father when it's been 30 years? And it's just true loneliness in space. And I can't remember who plays Roy, but it does a pretty good job. But he, in the end, kind of finds that there's just no one out there. He finds his father, but it's the way they shoot it is you can't tell if it's a dream sequence or if it's real life, because you never actually see the father. It's like through like a colored foggy glass or something, and you're seeing his shadow, and he's talking to Roy, but it's this weird, like, is this real? Like, you really can't tell if it's real or not, and essentially just leaves.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't amend anything. And I think the story is, like, the father found something, and it's, like, his whole life goal to, like, figure it out, and he kind of kills the crew that he had, and he's like, you can do this, son, you can come with me, and the son's like, no. And just leaves. And chooses the path of the isolation, but it's a good watch if you've never seen it. I think it's Chris Pratt.
Beautiful. Is this... No.
Oh, it's not Chris Pratt. It's Brad Pitt.
Ah, Brad Pitt. That makes sense.
I was like, it's something with...
I might have to check that out.
It's a good movie. It's a classic. I'm alone in a spaceship. Same with Interstellar.
Yep.
2014. Interstellar, ultimate form of isolation. The man's oldest question of, where do we come from? Who are we as people? But Interstellar plays with this sort of in a fascinating way where it hints to the them sort of as an otherworldly and anomaly that kind of controls space and time of who are they, who are them, who are we.
Yeah.
But never really solidifies that question, never really solidifies the answer to it. But it also plays with the innate fear that humans have in losing time, which is a whole nother kind of conversation when it comes to isolation, specifically in space. Due to mostly, it's so slow.
Yeah.
It's so slow to travel in space through some forms. I know some forms like Dune or Star Wars kind of have the hyper jumping. But a lot of these actual forms, like Interstellar, Ad Astra, even... I lost the other example. It's just going. Oh, Aliens. There's not really, like, hyper drifting. You just put yourself to sleep for 30 years, and then you wake up later. So it's this concept of, not only are you alone, but you're losing large amounts of time in your life. To what? To nothing. And then you just wake up. It's like, oh my god, it's crazy. Moving away from space a little bit, because this is mostly, I say space, but it's the easiest to deal with isolation. We talked a little bit, Blade Runner.
Yeah.
Deals with isolation in sci-fi, not space. Or at least a cyberpunk-y setting, where the main, at least Blade Runner 2049, the main character is an AI, a replicant, sort of a robot given human emotion, sent to figure out why other replicants are killing people. And it's this, not gruesome, but it's this lonely, lonely journey where the main dude thinks he might be actually human, or at least born from a robot, which feels more human than being a created robot. And he thinks he has a sister, and he's like searching for her. And he's like just going also on a brutal rampage where he's like killing other AI to find these answers. And the ending is he finds out that there was a brother and sister who were born from a robot. The brother died in birth, and the sister survived. And he's wrong. He's not the brother. We go through the entire movie thinking that he's looking for his sister, only to find out that it's not true. He is a robot. He is going to die soon, because they only last 4 years.
Yeah.
The robots. So he's nearing his end. And it's just that gruesome, immediate flip of the switch of thinking he found community, and then immediately being like, sorry, bro, it's not you. You're not the chosen one. So you got probably about a year until you die. Deal with existence. Because, Blade Runner also talks about, like, if I'm not human but given human emotions, why am I not human? Even though I know I'm robotic. Or, like, I am machine, but you're giving me human emotions. Does that not make me human? And then only to be slapped in the face and be like, no, you're not. You are just a robot.
Yeah.
Gut-wrenching.
Terrifying. I know they do something like that in, what is it, Detroit Become Human?
Yes. So that's much more on, which is also a great example, not really isolation, but if we're talking about sci-fi and robotics and dealing with existential dread of humanity. That deals with robots gaining consciousness through some, becoming a deviant, through some programming being flawed, where they go, oh shit, I am existing. I am no longer a computer. Do I fight this, or do I just go back to what I was before? And yeah, Detroit Becoming Human, great example of dealing with what is humanity.
Yes.
That we see a lot in Isolation. But they're usually isolated. They all kind of have their own forms.
Well, I mean, isolation is in a sense, it can be used to try to find a sense of your own existence.
Yeah.
So and everyone comes to their own conclusions on it, but it's, that's why I think these movies and like shows that we're talking about are so interesting in the fact of like, because sci-fi does it the most and handles it probably the best. Not all the time,
no,
but out of all the genres I've seen, it handles it the best. What does it mean to be not even just human, existing?
Yeah. Fantasy does it pretty well too. One of my favorite examples is Dante's Inferno. Though he technically has a companion, it is really Dante's journey through hell by himself.
It's not really a companion, it's more of a chauffeur.
Which is still a companion. Virgil follows him and directs him and talks about the night. Like, he's not truly alone, but he really is. It's just his journey. And it is fantasy, but yeah. Sci-fi really loves dealing with what is fucking humanity. And the quickest way to answer that question is to remove all outer forms of, horror and suspense and time travel, like just the person.
Yeah.
We'll kind of talk about this one quickly because we already talked about it. WALL-E. Love
WALL-E. Yeah.
You follow WALL-E being the only robot that kind of survives on Earth after a couple thousand years, being sent to clean it up. But WALL-E's a great example of the hopeful side of loneliness when you can kind of step out of it. WALL-E finds Eva. WALL-E finds community. He finds a purpose. Well, he already had a purpose, which was to clean up the Earth. But he finds purpose outside of that, and he finds community outside of that. And it's one of the few good times we see isolation become where we remove isolation from the story of.
Well, he already has a purpose, like you said, but he's also trying to find purpose in love.
Yeah.
Which is why when Eva comes down, it becomes kind of his main fixation of like, oh, there's another being I can fall incredibly high over heels over. Because
the only source of media he has, I don't know if you remember this, is like a 1950 rom-com.
Yeah.
Like, the only source of media he is consuming. And so it is that feeling of, well, I am made to clean up trash, but I am seeing something so much greater. And he gets the chance to experience it. It's so beautiful.
And I think the way that they handle it of like, he gets the chance to experience it, not because he's not depressed. I don't think WALL-E is ever really like
he gets a little bit in the beginning, but I think that's when it's kind of the point where it's like we're starting to see him really dip into it, but like just as that happens, Eva comes.
Yeah.
We don't really get to see the long terminal effects of like him really going down. But yeah, love WALL-E. WALL-E's a great example of, obviously it's, I think, Pixar, so it's going to be lighthearted.
Oh, Pixar. Damn you, Pixar. Makes you cry all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The next one I'm so excited about because I never actually got to watch it, but I know enough about the movie. You ever seen Passenger 2016?
I have not seen it, and I have not heard of it.
It is incredible. Another space. It is Chris Pratt, which is I think where I got Chris Pratt instead of Brad Pitt from, and Jennifer Lawrence.
Ooh, essentially, they're good combo.
Only two people that wake up from cryo sleep in a spaceship.
Oh boy.
The others I don't think are dead.
They're just still asleep.
But they're still asleep, and it's this dealing of one, like it's companionship through the movies. They both wake up prematurely from suspended animation. They cope with loneliness, being lost at space, as well as making some very unethical decisions. It uses more elements of sci-fi, but kind of lacks the excitement of a lot of Lost in Space movies. It's very slice of life in a sense. And you learn towards the end of the movie, and correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I remember, Jennifer Lawrence's character is a robot. She is not an actual person.
Oh, that's so
And so it's this really weird, like, trying to get together, and she, I think, from what I remember, she thinks she's human, but then she slowly starts to realize something's wrong. But it's a great movie, because it's isolation, both the two people, but then it starts to become against each other, in a sense, and it's very cool. Skipping over this one a little bit, The Martian, 2019.
Oh, yeah.
Sci-fi movie. He's not really lost, but he's on Mars by himself. Kind of dealing with you're left for dead on Mars. What do you do? We've kind of already talked about a bunch of what do you find purpose in.
Mm-hmm.
2001 Space Odyssey, which is 1968, is a very interesting concept of isolation, because they find an obelisk that rapidly evolves people. Like, you touch it and you're, like, evolved thousands of years. They kind of show a scene where, like, a monkey touches it and, like, the next morning he's using tools to, like, and he, like, kills someone. But it's the question of the middle part of the story is they're traveling to where the obelisk is. The AI goes rogue, starts to kill the crew. And eventually the crew kills the AI. And it's this, you're alone heading to what we know as sort of this, not doom ending, but it is what do you call it? Where there's just no hope.
Oh,
you say it all the time, and I can't think of the word now.
I can't think of the word right now. My brain's a little fried. Oh no! What is that word? I do say it all the time.
You say it all the time, and I cannot remember it. But it just feels like there's no hope.
Yeah.
And it's just them. I think 2 people survive, or maybe just 1 survive, but Grimdark. It's truly just Grimdark.
I talk about it a lot.
You do. Great movie. Classic movie.
Love it.
The next 2 I'm going to kind of talk about simultaneously, because though the main concept is in isolation, they have beautiful moments of isolation. First one, Starfield, 2023. You can play the entire game alone.
Nice.
Like, you can go and talk to people and go to planets and talk to people, but you can choose to fly the ship hyperdrift or hyperjump. You don't really have to have a crew. You have these moments where you can just fly the ship and it's just yourself. And then when you get to the moments where you land on a planet and it's just so many people and you're like, holy shit. But I think I talked about it in previous episodes of I've been watching a lot of Starfield, and there's a lot of moments where it's just kind of quiet. Yeah. You're like, damn. What do you do in that setting? Like, you gotta find the purpose, you have quests, you gotta do things. The other game is Death Stranding.
Death Stranding is a great one.
Yeah, because you're just walking through the world. And as I was saying, like, both these games, their main concept is in isolation, but they deal with that concept very well. Where Death Stranding does it so similarly with Starfield, where it's very peaceful.
I mean, you're mostly just delivering packages.
Just walking through the earth, dealing with, environmental, slipping on mud, rough terrain, but there's that feeling of calm as you're just by yourself. And then obviously the story happens, but... Yeah, the story happens. There are some weird sci-fi aliens? It's essentially the death realm. When you die, you go to this, like, I think it's called the beach. I think someone's can, like, wield the power of it, or it's, like, breaking the ties from it, but... Yeah, and for whatever reason, Nolan North, the main character, can come out of the death realm whenever he wants. He can, like, view it or, like, flip between them, but it's a very fun game if you can handle a very, at times, slow game. And to end our episode on my favorite, your favorite, Subnautica.
Oh boy! You're not wrong.
Subnautica is a prime example of isolation.
Yes.
And it incorporates everything. Sci-fi, loneliness, the feeling of hope, the feeling of being able to escape, but you don't get that until such later into the game. The thinking you've gone rescued to then immediately being like, well, everything's shit again. Yeah. The terrifying parts of isolation as well is, like, you're not truly alone in the sense that there are
things there, but those things are definitely going to kill you. For people who don't know, I have thalassophobia. I believe it's what it's called. Big things in water scare the fuck out of me.
Which is just
Subnautica in general. I strangely love the fuck out of that game because it makes me have that weird isolation perspective.
They also do it in a very good way where it eases you in.
Yes.
And it's never... I know a lot of people that have thalassophobia, their biggest fear is just being jumped into something.
Mm-hmm.
You know, being thrown off a boat and it's just the endless void of the ocean.
Yes.
Subnautica goes, what if I start you on a little tiny reef, like a very shallow, very beautiful, very bright, and you, when you feel like it, can dip your toes into the endless void of nothingness.
When you feel like it, you have to complete the game, but...
That's the question, though. If this wasn't a game, that's what I think...
I would never leave that fucking planet.
That's what Subnautica does beautifully, is you have to deal with that fear if you want to survive. Because what if this was a movie? What if this was actual real life? How many people would just sit in the shallow reefs and just kind of vibe out for the rest of their lives?
That's the thing. If it were actually me, I'd die on that planet.
Yeah.
I would definitely either get killed by one of the creatures in a very horrifying death, or I would live my lot in life on that reef. And
because I think about that all the time of, well, what happens when we don't have to play Subnautica? Would the main character, would they do what we do? Would we kind of make them do, which is explore the entire game and eventually leave the planet? Or would they just survive? Would they go to the island, make an island base, and just live for as long as they can live? It's the finding the purpose of, if you know the exit is on the dangerous side, you know, if you have to go through hell and back, through terror and through death after death, do you choose it if it's got the ending of finding civilization again? Or do you just become okay with being alone?
I think it really depends. One, it depends on the person. And two, I don't know, because those situations are hard to be like, oh, yeah, this would be me, I would do that.
Yeah.
But when you're actually in those situations, you never know. You know? You can kind of guesstimate based on the type of person you are usually. But, you know, fight or flight responses are a major thing.
Yeah.
We never know what we're going to do when we are, you know, aroused. And I say aroused not in the sense of, like, you know...
Like suspicion is aroused.
Yeah, like suspicion is aroused. But, like, we don't know when you're... Because when you are aroused, you have a chemical imbalance. Like, fear, anger, and stuff like that arouses your brain and makes it have a chemical imbalance. It's literally your frontal cortex just fucking stops.
Out the door.
Yeah. It's why, like, when you're angry... When a person is angry, you should never, like, take them strictly at their word, because what they're saying when they are angry isn't always necessarily how they are feeling. They are just losing their... Because when you're angry, you're literally losing your sense of reasoning. So, yeah. That's just...
I love Subnautica for that question of just, well... We, as a players, can force this character to go through things because we know it's a video game. What happens if it's not? You know, you can't really answer that question because, like you said, the only answer you get is when you're actually in that environment.
Yep.
But it's the fear. It's that deep guttural fear of, well, what do I do? Because the second I step off of this shallow reef, it's just a void.
I mean, if I was in Anna Ripley's situation, I'd be just as terrified.
And that's the thing is, I did also realize at the end of Alien, she does go through that questioning of, well, the ship is about to explode, and to escape, I have to literally go through the alien. What do I do? And of course, she's a main girl, and she's a badass, so she fucking grabs the cat, grabs the flamethrower, and just but
yeah.
And like with Subnautica, and I'll say this before we kind of end it, the only human interaction you get is distress signals. for which, when you find them, are already dead.
Yep, they're already gone.
The sunbeam, which is your fleeing hope of, holy shit, I've been rescued, immediately shot down and destroyed. And then it looks like my only friends are fish.
Mm-hmm.
And some of those fish are trying to kill me.
Fish, yeah. But also the Emperor. The Emperor Leviathan, when you speak to them, is the first time that you ever actually,
which is a whole other
have interaction,
because she lived her entire life in isolation.
Yeah.
What is it from her perspective to go? It's is it thousands of years or hundreds of years? She lives a real fucking long time alone, trapped in a prison, and for to think about it in her perspective of going, holy shit, there's someone here, someone that's willing to do things for the good.
Mm-hmm.
And to free her. You don't really free her, you free her children.
You free her children.
But that frees her. It's such,
You basically saved the planet from this, disease, which is crazy.
But yeah, I love Subnautica. And if you haven't played it, go play it. If you don't want to play it, there's so many playthroughs out there that shows a good, clean version of it. It's
an interesting time. As somebody who does have thalassophobia and gets scared by that kind of stuff, it's a good time. I'm it just is. So
absolutely. Well, I think my ending thought for this episode is, or not ending thought, almost a challenge for those that make it to the end. Take an hour.
Yeah.
Power down your phone, turn off all things. You can play music if you want.
Mm.
I know music always helps me when I deal with that sort of thing, but just think about it.
Mm-hmm.
Almost let yourself go into existential dread, because it's something that we don't get often, especially with the busyness of nowadays and the amount of media we are kind of forced to consume. Just sit there and just go, who am I? What the fuck am I doing with my life? What do I want to do with things? What does it mean to be a person? And I'll quote one of my favorite quotes of all times from Brittany Borowski, comedian, love her. She explains that the question of, well, what is life? What is the purpose of life? And she goes, the only reason life is there is for the universe to experience itself. That we are on this world to experience the world.
Mm-hmm.
And there is no other purpose other than to just live and to grow and to experience and to learn and love. And we die.
Yeah.
And it's the hope that the universe can just experience itself enough times to grow into something new.
Mm-hmm.
So think about it.
I think the last words I want to say on this subject. I know there are people out there who have a hard time when it comes to just existence in general.
Yeah.
My advice to you, take a minute to meditate. And there are many ways you can meditate. You don't have to sit down and curl your legs and just meditation, all it is really just organizing your thoughts.
Yeah.
Whatever that is for you, organize your thoughts, meditate, find your purpose, or at least think about your purpose.
And it doesn't have to be long term.
It can be short term.
I think that's what New Year's resolutions are kind of conveyed as, is well, what's your new goals? But we've talked about it. I mean, this entire year we want to be more creative.
Yeah.
It's a short purpose, it's a short goal in life that we have, but it's something that is easily workable towards.
I say give yourself something broad that you can always strive towards. What does it mean for us to be creative?
Yeah.
Creative is anything. So, give yourself something broad, but most of all, find something that makes existence tolerable. Try, I know it's easier said than done, try to focus on that and not the terribleness of existence.
Yeah.
Because I understand that existence is terrible sometimes.
It's also beautiful.
But it's also beautiful. And all it is perspective.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to change your perspective in the night. And you're not going to change your perspective in the night.
No.
It takes work. Unfortunately, it does take work. But give yourself the time. Because you do deserve that time.
Absolutely. You are loved. You have community. You at least have us, if you're listening to this.
Yeah. We're not going anywhere for at least a year.
At least a year.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, comment if there's any other forms or any other examples of isolation we missed, because there's so many out there.
Oh yeah.
What's your favorite? Why do you why do you love the concept? Do you hate the concept of being alone in a sci-fi setting?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's just questions. That's
is.
all it is.
It's all questions.
Specifically with sci-fi does that very nicely, of just asking questions and being like, well, how do we answer them?
And that's the fun of it. No answer is right. No answer is ever right.
Yeah.
But they're right for you.
Yeah.
That's the thing.
Hallelujah.
Hallelujah.
Anything else?
Smoke crack, eat ass. I don't know.
Do you have an idea what you want to do for next week?
Oh God.
Keep it hidden.
You know what? Since you kept it hidden from me last time,
I didn't know what I was going to do.
Yeah.
3 days ago.
Yeah.
It's not that I kept it hidden from you. I just had no idea.
Yeah. I'm gonna keep mine a little hidden, and we'll see what tomorrow brings.
Hope it's maybe less existential.
Yeah, a little less existential.
Because what was the last one? It was DC versus Marvel.
Well,
or not
yeah.
DC Marvel, but DC representation.
Yeah.
Which kind of got a little existential, a little bit.
I think that's just kind of how things are.
That's just how I talk.
That's how I
when
talk.
When I talk,
so
it gets existential.
That's where my brain lives, is existential.
And that's why we have a podcast.
Yeah.
Like, comment, subscribe.
Yep.
Join us every Monday at 5, 6 o'clock.
And be existential with us, because it means that you're alive. Be
existential.
Mm-hmm.
A great threat to someone.
I know, right?
Be existential. Well, that's all for me.
Yeah.
See you next week.
See you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.